I believe, our fourth Inside Stories. Is that right, Vicky? Yep, Vicky's nodding. So, and this is the first time we're doing it via Zoom. And obviously, this webinar Zoom call is about intersectionality of mental health and race. But I've been really reflecting on what does this conversation mean to me? Because I've been really excited about it for weeks since we put it in. And I just thought, actually, the big question that we're asking today is, what does belonging mean to us? And when I say us, my panel today, so who I'm going to introduce to you in a moment. So what does belonging mean from us, from our different perspectives, from the perspective of racism that we've experienced, our ethnicities, our cultural identities, and mental health? What impact does that have on our mental health? And I hope through our stories and through the sharing of our experiences, we will be able to nudge some thoughts in everybody that's listening today. So I'm going to first introduce my panel, and then I'm going to ask them to speak and share their stories for a few minutes each. And then I've got a whole load of questions. At the end, I'm going to try and leave sort of 10 minutes. So Vicky, you might have to just wave at me. You are in the middle of my screen. So when we're close to the end, for some questions from you all. We've already had some pre-questions where people have asked for resources, for support for mental health for Black people, for Asian people specifically. My team have gathered some information on that. We've also got a toolkit that we're putting together, so we'll circulate that afterwards. If anybody on this group have got signposts to organizations or resources that they think we should include in that, then please just put that in the chat, and Kate, who is producing this, will make sure that we've collected it all up and we share that as well. So first of all, my panel. I'm really delighted to introduce three fantastic people who I haven't known very long, but I feel like we might be on the beginnings of some good friendships with all three of them. So first of all, Teresa Owusu-Adjei. Teresa is a partner in PwC's financial services tax team and has over 24 years experience advising global asset managers. At the 2019 Black British Awards, she won the Senior Leader of the Year in Professional Services. As a minority from multiple lenses, female, Black, and a mother, she's passionate about bringing her personal experiences to help others. Welcome, Teresa. Ashley Fontaine. Ashley is a first-class BA English Literature and Film and Theatre graduate, and currently a digital marketing assistant at the enterprise tech company EM360. When she's not creating LinkedIn posts or managing campaigns, she's writing about and advocating for mental health. And she has an incredible story, and I'm just so inspired by this woman. And then Leroy Knowles, 20 years. Leroy has 20 years of experience in investment banking. Leroy is head of loan capital markets for the Middle East and Africa at BNP Paribas. He is passionate about diversity, social mobility, the role it plays in the corporate landscape. He authored an incredible article, How to Transition from Poverty to Investment Banking, the challenges, barriers, and the lessons learned. I do recommend you all go and look these amazing panel members up, look up, read some of the articles and blogs that they have posted, because they are very powerful. So Teresa, let me start with you. Please say a little, give us a little bit more inside your world and your story.
Sure, and I remember to unmute, which is a good start. So Poppy gave you a little bit about myself. I'm a partner at PwC, and actually I've just celebrated my 25th anniversary in the firm. The baby face is misleading, as I always say. And I was the first Black female partner in PwC. I think I maybe also have been the first Black female partner across professional services firm. And across the big four, we're 3,000 equity partners, and 12 of us are Black, 7 of us are in PwC. So there's kind of layers of minority there. So I've held a number of leadership roles over the years. At the moment, I'm a member of the firm's governance body, the supervisory board. So pretty senior position to be in. So you kind of look at, look at me as a Black woman, look at the senior position, that I have. And I get asked quite a lot, well, particularly by other Black people, well, how did I do it? And I would sort of say, well, I worked hard, I worked smart, I cultivated relationships, that turned into sponsorships, helped that I was good at my job as well. So that was kind of like, my sort of group of ingredients. And then people sort of start to go, well, do you have it all? And I kind of think, well, if you've got the traditional measures of having it all, I'm happily married, I've got 2 kids, come from a big family, still got friends from uni and school, etc. On that measure of it, you would kind of go, on the traditional measure of it, you'd kind of go, yes, I have it all. But then I go, actually, if I give you another sort of perspective of my career, then I guess I'll leave you to kind of think about whether I do have it all. So I talked about working hard, working smart, cultivating relationships, but I'm a Black woman. So working hard for me does mean, and has always meant, that I was told probably about 40 years ago, as a kid, that I had to work twice as hard as anyone else because I'm Black, and I have to work twice as hard, and more than that, because I was a girl. So my entire life, my entire career has always been, in order to make other people colorblind, and in order to give other people the same opportunities, in order to have equal access to opportunities, I had to outperform 4 times as much, work 4 times as hard. And that's kind of been the narrative, that's the framework in which, will I be good enough? So I talked about, working smart, cultivating relationships. And with that, I sort of think of 2 things. The persona of the angry Black woman, that's my fear, and the persona of the strong Black woman, which is also a fear. So when I talk about angry Black woman, the reason why it's a fear is because it's, as a Black woman, it's literally the worst thing that you can be labeled with. So it's, and when I say that, it's because it means it's like shackles. You can't be who you are because you can't express any negative emotion. You can't express your frustration because you're angry. You've got to be really careful about how you express an opinion because you're not assertive, you're angry. So every time I have a conversation, people talk about the fact that when I speak, as I'm speaking to you now, I speak quite slowly. Well, why do I speak slowly? It's because my mind is racing and I'm 2 sentences ahead because I'm constantly filtering what's going to come out before I say it. And so people who know me well know that actually every once in a while I trip over my words, and that's because the 2 sentences ahead meet what I'm saying now. So the mind is constantly racing because I'm thinking about how I'm being perceived. So when I also sort of think a strong Black woman, that's more of a negative than it is positive. To be the first Black female partner and to be a successful senior partner, I have bags of resilience. But so does every so does every partner, whether they're white, male, etc. But as a Black person, the perception of me that I'm strong means that I'm never allowed to be vulnerable, never allowed to be fragile. If I have an interaction with somebody where they're vulnerable and they're fragile, the perception is that angry Black woman has probably done something to them. So every interaction that I have with people, the mind is constantly racing, because I know that I will never be privileged enough to be regarded as vulnerable or fragile. And I'll never be privileged enough to be, the perception is that I'll be angry rather than assertive. So it's pretty hard to be a successful Black woman, and it's pretty hard to be a Black woman in the city without the cost, not being about my family, my friends, my kids, whatever, but the cost being about the constant mind racing, so the anxiety. So I guess if there's one thing I kind of leave you with today, is that statistically, common mental health issues, there's no difference. The research shows that there's no difference between different races of men, the occurrence of mental health issues. And there's also no difference between white women and black men and white men. Where there is a difference is Black women. The occurrence of mental health issues is double what it is for Black women than it is for white men. And when you're feeling you're having to work twice as hard, or you're worried about being an angry Black woman, you're trying to be a strong Black woman, I'm kind of not surprised. So Poppy, that's a little bit about me and a little bit of thoughts to kind of leave people with. And Poppy's gone blank.
I think Poppy's had a slight delay on her sound.
Thank you so much for that, Teresa. And I like. Okay, I'm going to switch my. Is that better?
Yeah,
is
that's
that better?
Thank you, Poppy.
Okay, Teresa, thanks so much for that. And I think that the statistic that you put up right at the beginning, which is 3,000 partners and only 12 Black people, and then actually then, you know, it really demonstrates what being a minority of minority is, and actually how the accumulation of stress can build up within that. So thank you so much for sharing, and we're going to come back and have a much deeper conversation in a moment. But let me introduce Ashley next. Ashley, you've got a powerful personal story of loss, then the anxiety that followed, and the detrimental impact of the strong Black woman from your own experiences as well. Let me hand over to you to talk us through your experiences.
Thank you, Poppy. So hi everyone. Yeah, my name's Ashley. And yeah, I'm really glad that Teresa spoke a bit about the Strong Black Women trip, because I have my own experience of that in terms of my own personal story, specifically in terms of my mental health. So I would say that my journey with my mental health began 2018, so just after the death of my dad. You know, loss can affect people in so many different ways. It led to me suffering from general anxiety, like PTSD, and I still battle with these today, specifically brain fog, which is like a colloquial term used to like refer to memory problems, like a lack of mental clarity, and just the kind of inability to focus, really. And it was quite strange for me, because it was kind of the idea that anxiety left me, as an English student, anxiety left me practically speechless, and that was really hard to deal with. And I lost my confidence a lot since that year, and the constant like ebb and flow of overwhelming sadness, the inability to control my low moods. It was just a lot in terms of assignments, and it had a really negative impact. You know, I had loads of extended deadlines. I did actually graduate later than everyone else, but essentially I just felt really weak. I kind of looked in the mirror and I saw someone that I didn't really particularly like. You know, I didn't see the old Ashley. That Ashley who I saw was as kind of strong, and prior to my dad's death, I'd always kind of perceived myself and saw that others also saw me as quite resilient and quite self-assured. You know, I'd climbed mountains and trekked for miles to complete Duke of Edinburgh expeditions. I powered through countless musical theatre, dance shows and exams despite having a near fatal knee injury. And I even received a card on the birthday before my dad's death from one of my friends saying that I was a strong, independent Black woman. I hated at the time, you know, when I was getting anxious, or if I showed any sort of signs of anxiety or vulnerability. And I initially thought that this urge to just want to get back on track with my life, get back to being strong, I thought that kind of stemmed from wanting to go back to going back to the old me. However, it wasn't until earlier this year when I was doing an event with my university. It was called BAME Women in the Workplace, and it was our alumni who'd come from Reading University. And yeah, it wasn't till that event that I realized this kind of spiritual bondage to strength kind of stems from something way deeper, something ingrained in Black womanhood, and that is, you know, the strong Black woman trope, as Teresa was saying. So yeah, so the idea that you, as a Black woman, you can't be vulnerable. You have to have this superhuman strength and push on regardless of any adversities that you might be facing. And it just kind of dawned on me then that all my life I've been surrounded by strong Black women. So the people in my family, so the women, the aunties, on my dad's side especially, my mom, and then the people that you see in the media, when you see specifically Black women, are also always characterized as strong. They're always reduced to that image. So all along, I have been consuming and subconsciously internalizing the ideology. My battle with anxiety, frankly, just opened my eyes to it. But this isn't the only racial ideology that is having a negative impact on my mental health. So in my transition into work, I also feel the burden of Black excellence. And I was reading a recent article actually from the Evening Standard, and it was saying that only 3% of the technology industry's employees are Black. And I am the only Black person, let alone Black woman, in my company. So the pressure to be great, to be excellent, and a perfect role model for like the younger Black generation in my role within the tech industry is weighty, quite frankly hard to bear a lot of the time. So yeah, as Teresa was saying, it's, when you're Black and a woman, it's just double. Everything is just 10 times heavier. So yeah, that's pretty much me.
Thanks, Ashley. And Leroy, over to you to share a bit more about your experiences with us before we go into discussion.
Sure, thank you very much, Poppy. It's a pleasure to be here sort of talking about the intersection between sort of race and mental health, which I think, given all of the events over the last few months, has become more of an important topic than ever before, and certainly something which organizations and society just need to understand a bit better, and also be able to be more equipped to deal with that in a much better manner than maybe they have done in the past. You know, just a little bit about me. So I grew up in a very, I'd say, diverse family, a single parent family on a council estate in Bedford. Bedford is about 50 miles north of London. And I grew up with my mother, and I was the youngest of 4 siblings. Now we had, you know, different dads. My 2 elder siblings were mixed race. My youngest sister was white, and my mother was white, and she is from Canada, and my father is Black, and he is from Jamaica. And he came to England as part of the Windrush generation in the 1960s. So in that respect, I am mixed race, but I identify as Black. You know, lots of the treatments that I've had in the past have been because I am Black. And from my perspective, that's also how, you know, society and the world views me. But, you know, we talked about this a bit earlier in terms of the duality of belonging and fitting in. being mixed race, it does come with its own, I would say, complexities and also contradictions. And I often have to grapple with a sense of belonging depending on where I am and who I'm speaking to at particular points in time. So that's maybe something which we can sort of come back to and discuss in a bit more sort of detail sort of going forward. I grew up in a very, I would say, poor socioeconomic area. I grew up in poverty. It doesn't matter what statistic you use. I grew up in poverty, and poverty itself is very systemic. I think once you're in poverty, it's very difficult to escape, unless you have a helping hand. And I grew up in a community where, we didn't have any role models, particularly Black role models from, professional fields such as finance or banking or anything like that. So, the opportunities were very, very limited. And the reason I bring this up, because I know we're talking about the intersection between race and mental health, but the reality is we also need to look at, social inequalities and poverty when we're talking about race. And the reason being, if we look at the UK, almost 50% of households, 50% of Black households are currently living in poverty. So when we start talking about well-being in relation to race, we also need to think about all of the anxieties and financial distress that a lot of Black people are actually facing just because of the lack of financial resources that they had, in their childhood in particular. And all of this feeds in and it compounds together with racial traumas that you would experience, all compounds over time and really has a long, I would say, detrimental impact on your sort of well-being. So just in terms of like the last few months, because I want to talk about that, because obviously we witnessed quite a few sad events, and these events, I would say, are not necessarily new for us in the Black community. I mean, I've always been Black, so I've suffered with racism as a child, and that's really had an impact on my views and my perceptions of the world. I think I first heard a racial comment when I was 7 years old. And quite frankly, I would say my life since then, in terms of how I view things, have never quite, been the same. I suddenly realized at a very early age that, maybe I don't belong here, or I am different, and I need to be careful that I'm different, because clearly some people take offense to me for one reason or another. And despite this incident happening almost 35 years ago, it still plays on my mind sort of all the time, together with additional racial traumas that, I would have suffered over time. But having said that, I think that, these last few months have certainly led to, some positives. I see now Black people, we seem to have more of a platform to talk about certain issues and experiences, particularly lived experiences, in a much more open manner. We feel that we have the platform and the voice to talk about these issues without any fears of repercussions. And I also think that those people who haven't experienced any form of racial trauma in the past, or people from the white community, have been a lot more willing to listen, get educated on the matter, and in a lot of instances also demonstrate support. I mean, I've had a number of calls from people saying, look, how can I help? What more can I do? And this is certainly something which, I hadn't really thought about or experienced before all of this. But there are some downsides with that. I mean, one of the downsides is that whenever the topic of race pops up, it sort of triggers some very sort of painful racial traumas that you may have experienced in the past. And you sort of have to relive those over and over again, for the benefit of educating others. And it can be painful for yourself, and it's really not necessarily healthy at all. And it does have an impact on, your overall well-being. And we have to remember that every single racial incident that we've heard or suffered in the past, it's a negative message that we are receiving. You get constant negative messages. It's a message from an individual that, you may not be as worthy as other people, you don't have the same value as other people, or it's a message saying you do not belong here. for one reason or another, and that can certainly be, quite painful. And from my perspective, it's no surprise that Black people in the UK are more likely to suffer from mental health issues than any other race. And I did hear what sort of Teresa said earlier, and I'm very surprised at that, to be honest. Something that I would need to look at, because when we think about rates of mental health issues between Black males and Black whites, I would be very, very surprised if they were actually the same. And the reason I say that, particularly given my background, is that, you can see that Black people are more likely to be, up in the criminal justice courts, or Black people are more likely to be excluded from schools, and Black people are more likely to be stopped and searched, and Black people are more likely to be unemployed, and 50% of the UK households, Black households, are living in poverty. And I really struggle to see how all of that cannot translate into much higher rates of mental health issues for Black males. So I'll just leave it at that. And the final thing I just want to say is that, we, in the Black community, a lot of firms are certainly looking much closer at their D&I strategies when it comes to race, and I certainly think that that is a positive. But a lot of Black people are being encouraged, and sometimes very strongly encouraged, to either get involved and talk about their own experiences when it comes to race. And I've already mentioned that that can have a detrimental impact on their well-being. And some people don't want to do that. And I think their decisions would obviously need to be respected. And where people do want to talk about that to educate others, it's important that they have the necessary support behind them. Because not only is it traumatic in some cases, but a lot of people who are getting involved in the racial discussions also have their day jobs as well. So it's just adding to, I would say, the burden, the longer hours in the day, I would say more lack of sleep that people are getting while they're focused on these topics. And we just need to be mindful of the detrimental impacts that that could have.
Thanks, Leroy. That's really helpful setup. Three very different perspectives. The panel are already disagreeing, so that's good, because we're going to get some different perspectives on that. Data is always a point of interesting debate. So, but look, Teresa, I'm going to come back to you, and I'm just going to set this up with a tiny story from myself. So, actually, the reason why I'm in this setup today, many people have seen me in a different setup, is I'm at my mum's house and I'm in my mum's bedroom. And today is the 5th anniversary of my dad passing away. So, my brothers and I are trying to get together. I've got 2 younger brothers this evening to celebrate, and we talked about that yesterday in terms of funerals and some of the things that we do in our cultures and actually remain authentic within our workplace to share how we celebrate, how we do grief, etc. So I'm going to come to you on that in a minute, because we had a great chat. But I remember there was an incident where my dad practicing Muslim, so he spent the last 10 years doing a lot of voluntary work at the mosque of his life. And one of the things that happened at one point was there was a massive demonstration of in outside the mosque around people not being happy that the bingo club was being turned into a mosque, and somebody had actually come and chucked a bucket of pig's blood all over the mosque steps, and obviously being a Muslim, the fact that Muslims don't eat pork, etc. So you can understand the offence, I guess, that was meant to create. And then they'd written on the wall in red, "Go home," and racist words. And I remember driving past the mosque, and I remember seeing my dad at the steps mopping down the blood, because it was Friday prayers and everybody was going to turn up. And I remember having a conversation with him that evening about it, and he just sort of did what many dads of that generation did, which was sort of shrugged and went, "We don't really belong here. Like, I'm here to work, got family at home to support, multi-generational family. We're trying to get ourselves out of poverty. And there's some things you're just going to have to accept." And you think because you've had an education here, because you've got a job, that you belong, but you will never belong. And it's really important that you stay connected to your Bangladeshi community, culture, family. Well, you could imagine as a teenager, that was a big issue. So, I mean, I'm not even going to go into that. But that question, I guess, more than any other day, really resonates with me today. So where do we belong? And I remember taking that question to my manager at the time and saying, you know, I was going through a leadership program. So was in that real reflective space of where am I and where I do belong here. And then, you know, reading the notes going, go back home. And I'm just questioning where is home? Where is home for me? And I remember speaking to my manager at the time, and she just said something like, but I don't see color. And I remember thinking, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? I'm not really sure how I feel about that, but it didn't feel right, because if you don't see color, then you can't empathize and understand, at least try and understand where I might be coming at it from. So I wanted to ask you about color consciousness. Can you just tell us more about your views on that, given your status and position in a very white, not just organization at your level, but sector?
Yeah, sure. Firstly, Poppy, my condolences for today to you and to your family. So colour consciousness, when we spoke the other day, I said that I don't like the phrase being colourblind. And in my intro, I talked about if you're white and you're colourblind, that's because I've had to work 4 times as hard for you to focus on my achievements and my output rather than my colour. That's not fair, and you're not really colourblind, because I had to work really hard for you to forget both my colour and my gender. So a phrase that we've coined, or I've coined internally within PwC, is that it's important to be colour conscious and actually be the opposite of being colourblind. Because I think all of us live in our bubbles, and there is something about human nature where you relate to the person that most reminds you of you. And I'm talking to you today as a partner, because I was given the opportunities very early in my career. But I can also tell you that very early in my career, the first year of my career, quite frankly, sucked. And because I wasn't given the opportunities, and I think that happened because, particularly those first kind of managerial levels, you're really sort of focused on doing the right things for the partners that you work for, and you need to trust somebody to deliver for you. And you just kind of go, when you're under pressure and you need to deliver for a client, and you've got a partner, you've got a senior manager or director on you as well, you kind of go, I need to trust somebody to deliver this. And by default, your subconsciousness goes, well, actually, the person that I'm going to trust is the person who most reminds me of me. So that is the hardest thing, whether you're in my firm or any of the firms of the people who are here, is that subconscious. So to have that subconscious, when we're all under pressure, we default to what's familiar, because you can trust you and you can trust somebody who reminds you of you. So marrying that with being colorblind, I think it's important that you're color conscious and actually go out of your way to associate with, to give opportunities to people who are kind of different.
And I would say, Teresa, that's even more important in this post-pandemic world, where we have got blended patterns of working, and actually default is to give interesting projects, career development initiatives to people that we trust and work with us on a subconscious level, people that represent and look like us. So thank you very much for that. Leroy, in a moment, I'm going to ask you a little bit more about allyship and what does that translate to, and if you would be able to specifically give an example of that. I mean, this term allyship is very new, and like you said, you've always been a Black man, I've always been an Asian woman, so racism isn't new, and neither is allyship. So it'd be lovely if you could actually think about that for a moment. But in the meantime, Ashley, I'm going to come to you, and thank you so much for sharing so much of you today. And thank you so much for being very clear around what does it mean to be labeled this sort of strong Black woman. I really got that from your presentation, from your talk. But I'm really interested in grief, and interested in, you know, transition is a significant point in anybody's career where it's challenging and we need to take care of ourselves even more. But when you were going through that very difficult period, which I know is only a year ago, what support did you get, and what support did you need? How did you seek help?
Yeah, so initially the support I got was through my uni. So I got counselling. I had about 6 sessions, managed to stretch it to 7, just because I said, look, I really need it. I understood obviously that in terms of universities, like having counselling, it's big and everyone wants it practically. There's so many people on the waiting list trying to get in, but I was very lucky that they allowed me to have 7 slots, so I had 1 every month, which wasn't sufficient for me, but it was the best I could do at the time, so I took it. I wouldn't necessarily say that it helped me that much, particularly because the type of counsellor that I had, she was a absolutely lovely woman, don't get me wrong, but she was a white woman, and when I was trying to communicate some of the things that I had battled with in terms of my mental health because of my Blackness and because of the kind of Black themes that linked to my dad's death in particular, the response that I got was usually kind of like an "oh," or "I'm so sorry," or like she couldn't really formulate any other kind of words to say or anything to specifically help me with my particular issues. So that was kind of the first support that I got, but it wasn't that helpful, unfortunately. And I should have, in terms of my dad's death, because of the nature of it, I should have got victim support, but it never came round to me. Me and my mum were just hounding at the DC to try and get some victim support, and it never happened. And eventually, I ended up speaking to the welfare at my uni, and I had a really good relationship with the woman there. She was really great, and she put me in contact with victim support. But I had a very, unfortunately, bad experience with victim support. It was just didn't seem like they kind of had my back, and it was a lot of me chasing them. When in my head I was like, well, you're supposed to help me, I'm the victim. So yeah, I haven't had the greatest experience in terms of having bereavement or grief support, but I think in hindsight, what I thought I needed at the beginning, what I really need actually now, is a Black female therapist, and unfortunately lockdown stopped me from kind of getting to the place I wanted to be in terms of therapy, because I prefer face-to-face therapy. I'm not really keen on doing it over the internet, but hopefully once this is kind of started to die down, I can start picking that back up again. But yeah, I didn't have the greatest experience of counselling or anything at the moment in terms of support, but yeah.
Ashley, I'm keen that we if this community, and there are some exceptional leaders from the mental health world on here, can't support you to get the right support, the right therapist, then I think we failed dramatically. So that's something that I will come back to you on. But I'm also, let me ask you another question. The victim support, and your dad died under very tragic circumstances, and Ashley's written a blog about that. If anybody wants to read it, we will share resources after this and the blogs of our speakers. But like, you've got an aspiration now, haven't you? Because you've looked at some data. I know you haven't done much investigation on this, but you've got an aspiration to create something. Tell us about that.
Yeah. So yeah, since my mental health journey and since my dad's death, I'm actually thinking about starting an organisation that specifically addresses my personal needs. So it's a particular, if you read my blog, you'll kind of understand a bit more, but it is specifically going to be addressing young, indirect, Black, young, indirect, let me get this right. It's specifically going to address people who are indirectly suffering from knife crime, specifically Black young adults. So that is my experience. So that's how my dad passed, and I'm the indirect victim. And there, apart from victim support, there isn't actually anything that helps, supports people like that at the moment, from the research that I've done, and I've been tirelessly researching if there is any support like that for the past few months now, and I haven't found anything. So yeah, that's something I'm really keen to get going in the next, well, depends how far I get, but yeah, at least do a bit more research first, but yeah.
So I'm just going to say a couple of things. One is, we're all behind you, and there's a lot of people with a lot of knowledge on this course. So I am going to ask people, if you've got any signposts, any data, or any ideas on how you might help Ashley reach her vision and aspiration, then drop us a line and we'll connect you. And the second thing I'm going to say is, Ashley, you know, your courage is just literally shines, and I'm really aware that you're still on your recovery journey. So pace it and look after yourself in that journey. I'm going to come back to you again in a moment. But Leroy, allyship. I mean, obviously in Ashley's story, we needed allyship. We needed organizations to step in and recognize what was going on, and the fact that she shouldn't have to have chased for the support that she needed. It looks like the university did a good job of having a go, but then they hadn't done the second bit, which is, how do you actually support people with the right, you know, once people have been courageous enough to ask for help, then getting a therapist who wasn't qualified it was not good. And it means that Ashley hasn't necessarily gone on the recovery journey that someone else might have. Allyship, tell us what you think about that.
So I think, you know, in general, when I think about allies, I think about support, and I think about, you know, the level of support that is provided, you know, particularly from the white community, in terms of spotting what is happening in terms of either opportunities, or spotting what is happening in terms of visibility, and spotting what is happening in terms of, you know, people's backgrounds, you know, whether it's mental health issues or whether it's social issues from social inequality, and sort of looking at how they can support in that way. You know, from my own perspective, I've had people that have come into my life who have really sort of changed it all around by literally spotting that, one, I had some talent, but because of my circumstance, or maybe because of my race, opportunities weren't necessarily going to come my way. And they've gone completely out of, you know, off their own back, they've gone out of their way to make sure that certain opportunities were provided to me so that I could showcase my potential and showcase my talent, and hence be a better version of myself. So when I think about allyship, I think about those kind of things. I mean, one other thing as well, when it sort of comes to racism, I've seen this a bit more now, is it's sort of shouting out when something's wrong. I mean, historically, if someone said something wrong, which was potentially going to be detrimental to someone of color, a lot of people normally would have just remained quite quiet. Now, I'm on I'll say a WhatsApp group with a number of dads from one of my children's school. And a few weeks ago, someone sent around a message which, you know, they assumed was a joke, but it could be quite offensive to an ethnic minority. And normally it would go quite quiet in that instance, or maybe one or two people would sort of say, ha ha, that's very funny. But in this instance, I was massively and pleasantly surprised about the number of people who actually sent messages back saying those kind of comments and those kind of messages have no place on this WhatsApp group. Either remove it or I will remove myself. And for me, that's sort of what an ally is being. It's sort of providing the necessary support to the individuals who need it in various different ways. And like I say, I've benefited from, I wouldn't say necessary allyship, but mentorship, you know, throughout my life in terms of people who have been able to provide me with visibility and opportunities where not necessarily I would have realized that I required those.
Thanks, Leroy. And Teresa, I couldn't agree more, but Teresa, I'm going to come to you around authenticity and grief and bereavement in a moment. But before I do, just some reflections on what you've just said around allyship. Really, I mean, what a great story about the WhatsApp group. I relate to that. Only a couple of days ago, I think it was on my Twitter, someone told me to go back home to Kolkata. My response was, I've never been to Kolkata. I've heard that it's a fantastic place. But I mean, that was clearly a racist thing. And actually a colleague jumped in and went, can you just go away with your racism, which was great to experience. And you know, it's probably not even a Twitter account properly, but the point is, those kind of jokes and statements are still happening. You know, the story that I told at the beginning, it's still happening. And for me, allyship is about when we move from empathy to compassion. So for me, empathy, I hope everybody here will be able to relate to, is when we, you know, are clear on it, when we can put ourselves in somebody else's shoes and empathize with their experience and hear them and listen. For me, compassion is when you then take action to reduce the distress or enhance the experience for that person to feel better. And sometimes that might just be a really great listening ear, just a really good conversation. That's all the action that you need to take. And sometimes it might be actually putting a voice on the WhatsApp group or leaning in so that you don't have to. Because I find still, when I've heard a racist comment, and like you, my early racist experiences would have been sort of before the age of 10, I go mute. I still get very stuck. My heart still palpitates. You know, so I was quite impressed the other day that I was able to just make a joke about the Kolkata thing. But that was sort of a good 25 minutes later when I sort of went to the family and went, I've never been to Kolkata. And then they laughed, and I thought, of course, that's the response, isn't it? What else do you say about that? So I think there's something, for me, that's how I've started to describe allyship, is it's when people move from just empathizing, which is powerful enough as it is, to compassion, which is actually acting to do something so that you don't have to. So thanks for that. Teresa, authenticity, let's talk about that. And you and I had a right laugh the other day around feeling like we're sold out, like, you know, so that sort of double message that we get from different parts of our worlds. You know, we've got blended families, we've got white partners, and then there's that whole actually cultural differences in terms of rituals and grief and bereavement. So let's just talk about that for a moment.
Sure. So I'm British Ghanaian, and I would say that from a cultural perspective, probably to my Ghanaian family back in Ghana, I'm not Ghanaian enough. I speak our language with an accent, with a British accent. So I'll never be Ghanaian enough. Whereas, you know, here in the UK, I'll never be white enough, and clearly I'll never be white enough. To a certain extent, it's kind of quite, you know, it's quite hard to sort of fit in anywhere. But what I hear frequently, I do quite a lot of mentoring, and what I hear frequently from the younger generation, people like Ashley, is that they feel that they can't take their authentic self to work. And I was actually talking about this session today earlier on, and somebody was giving me, in response to that, somebody said to me that they had mentored somebody, a young Black woman, and what she had said to them, and this for me kind of epitomizes what I've heard, that they feel that when they go to work, when they pass the turnstiles, clearly pre-COVID, that basically they become a completely different person as they pass the turnstiles. And the work version of them is the person that is there from 9 to 5 or whatever. And then when they come back out of the turnstiles, they go back to being that other person. So you're like two different people. And we were, as we were kind of discussing this earlier on today, what we were all kind of agreeing, and you know, we're all, these were fellow partners who are kind of senior people. And what we were saying was that it's actually really important. There's a kind of a 0 to 10. And 10 is where you are, you know, completely comfortable sharing everything you are, and the sort of the 0 is the example that I've just given. So I was given the example of my mum passed away last June. I was on holiday with her for a week, May half term, and she looked as fit as a fiddle, everything was fine, and she basically dropped dead on me on my last day of the holiday. Now, in the Ghanaian culture, if they're getting buried within 3 months, you're going fast. So my mum was buried 10 weeks, massive negotiation. And my mum was my biggest cheerleader. She was the one who kind of was a never give up type person. So last summer, and the whole of the last year has been pretty traumatic, but I felt it was really important to share my culture and what I was going through. The fact that the way we put on funerals would put a wedding to shame. The fact that I was organising this wedding, which was attended by 1,000 people, and that I was organising photographers, the band, the videographer, the caterers. It was a 4-day funeral. And the whole thing, you know, I've never felt more Ghanaian than I did last summer. Now, I could have kept all of that to myself, like I'm sure quite a lot of our young Black people do. But I think I've kind of, you know, learned throughout my career that progression for me has been around cultivating relationships, and that sharing what I was going through, you know, was incredibly important, and allowed people to kind of get to know me a little bit more. So in fact, the day that I sort of flew, you know, left in August to kind of fly to Ghana to go and bury my mum, I sent everybody in my team a link to a BBC article. I'd encourage you all to kind of look at it if you fancy morbid curiosity as to basically why Ghanaians don't get buried within a week or whatever, and to kind of explain what I was going to go through over that 4 days. So it's hard to be, you know, I talked earlier on that on one level, it's hard to be the authentic you when the mind is constantly racing and you're constantly concerned about how you're going to be perceived. And the risk is that a lot of our Black people feel that because they're so concerned about how they are perceived, that they go completely the other way and they give nothing of themselves. And what I see is that what then happens is that if you don't give anything of yourself, people can't relate to you and want to mentor you or sponsor you. So I found that being authentic whilst suffering because, you know, I can't show frustration or whatever, that there isn't a 0 or a 10. You've got to be able to find a middle ground. And it's so important that our young Black people understand that in terms of their own career progression.
Thanks, Teresa, and that's such a powerful insight. So sometimes we might be afraid of bringing our whole selves to work because of the consequences. Sometimes we're ashamed, sometimes we don't want to be different, you know, sometimes we just want to blend in. Another time, and I guess what we're saying here, or what I'm hearing you say, and I completely agree with you, is how we human beings, for resilience is about how many meaningful connections we have in our world, and actually, and whether that's resilience with our mental health, with our, you know, bouncing back and progressing in our careers. So in order to build meaningful connections, you have to give insight and into yourself and take a risk and form some of those relationships at work with people, and trust, and take a risk and trust.
Yeah, and
thank
Poppy,
you very much.
Sorry, Poppy, I'd probably add one other thing that I would say is that it was probably my mum's death that for the first time, it was almost like it was so extreme and so traumatic that I was going to be vulnerable and fragile, because I was vulnerable and fragile. And I was quite happy to sort of say to people, you know, I cried for every single day for a year. And I felt that as a senior leader, that it was okay, that it was important that I let people, and particularly the sort of, you know, the young ethnic minorities that I mentor, understand that I was really okay with not being okay.
Thank you. Thank you. Ashley, I'm going to come back to you because I feel like the conversation so far is leading to one thing in my mind, which is how do we all create psychologically safe workplaces where people can bring their whole selves to work, where people can speak up when they see things that are happening that compromises their values, that compromises the organization that they work for. And most importantly, where people can bring new ideas and fresh thinking and be heard, so that actually we as individuals flourish, but we are the businesses that we're and organizations that we're part of also flourish, because fresh thinking and new ideas is what creates progress. But your experience hasn't necessarily been a psychologically safe environment for lots of different reasons. And I'm interested in how the intersection of being a young, gorgeous Black woman, a talented young Black woman, but also, and within that, your mental health lived experience. How has all of that shaped you? And before you start, Ashley, you're on mute. I'm just going to say to everybody, after Ashley, we've got about 15 minutes left. I'm looking for questions, etc. So if you want to put questions on the chat box, chat, I will try my best to get some responses for you from our panel. If you make it clear who it's to, or if it's just general, then I'll do my best. But over to you, Ashley.
Thank you. Yeah, I think it's just shaped me in general, especially, like I said, because of my career aspirations now. So I've done a total 360, I guess. I mean, it's still marketing, but it's not in tech. I mean, for me, tech is a little bit too fast paced majority of the time, and that's just the nature of the world. So yeah, now I want to transition into going into mental health charities. So I just want to be able to now help other people who have unfortunately experienced something either similar or the same to me. Yeah, I want to start up that organization that I spoke about before. And essentially it's just about kind of creating that space of support that I never had, or I still kind of not necessarily don't have. And yeah, just being someone that other people can feel like they can not necessarily look up to, but feel like they can relate to. And yeah, that's just kind of the whole kind of experience of the intersectionality between being a Black woman. It's just yeah, I think we just need to just support one another. I think that's the main thing that I take away from everything, and that how it's shaped me.
Thanks, Ashley. And in terms of, I mean, it feels like your career is going to take a really interesting journey. I'm interested in the peer support bit, because we know that one of the most important things that we can do as a protective factor for our mental well-being is to be part of peer groups that are incredibly that are supportive, because that's what peer networks are about, because we can hear each other's solutions to problems, we can just sit with each other and be empathetic, and we don't need to say anything. Have you been able to create a peer support around this, or where do you get your fuel from, I guess?
Mainly my friends. It's weird. You probably expect me to say family, but I have this kind of thing where it's like my family are like too close to the situation. So it's like if I speak about something that I'm going through to them, I'm like, oh, I don't really want to speak about it to them in case I kind of bring up the trauma again. Whereas my friends are so far removed from it in some sense that I feel like I can easily open up to them and talk to them about things. So yeah, my friends definitely. So these are the friends that I've had since secondary school. Didn't really feel that comfortable talking about it with the friends that I had at uni. So Reading is predominantly a white space. So I didn't necessarily feel like I could open up, in the sense that I thought that they might see me different, might judge me. And yeah, so my friends are definitely my peer support group.
Great. Thanks, Ashley. So any questions, anyone? I mean, I'm very happy for people to come off of mute and offer a reflection or pose a question or use the chat function to do that. I will pause for a few seconds to see if anybody. Teresa, no, Tessa, go on. Tessa McCowan, go. Can't hear you. Yeah.
Sorry. So fabulous session. Thank you to all three speakers. I find in some of the work I've done, white people in particular are too afraid to discuss race because of fear for saying the wrong thing. And so we try and create a psychologically safe space, you know, where it's all right to make mistakes. But I totally get Leroy's point about, but that shouldn't be at the cost of, say, Black people. So any thoughts or advice in that respect?
Yeah, I mean, maybe I'll take this one. I mean, race
Leroy,
itself,
there's another
yes.
one that I'd quite like to you to take while you're there as well. So it's from Penelope, and it's around what needs to change in the workplace culture to encourage young Black men to talk confidently about their experiences rather than just fit in. It's two sides of the same coin, I think, these two questions. So please do have a go at both if you can.
Sure, no, that's fine. I mean, the reason why race itself has not really been on the agenda or talked about is, quite rightly, Tessa, it's because of fear. I mean, it's fear on the side of white people, but it's also been fear on the side of Black people. I mean, Black people have a lot to share, and they, you know, some are very willing to share their experiences, but in the past, they've been worried about either playing the race card or being viewed, or worried about sort of repercussions for their career of doing so. And then from white person's perspective, there's always this fear of saying something wrong. I mean, do you say people of color? Do you say Black African? Do you say mixed race? Do you say half caste? Why can you call someone Black, but if you refer to a group of people as Blacks, it can be as offensive, you know, all of these things. And there's a fear of, well, if I say one thing wrong, then I'm going to get completely hounded by it. So I can completely understand why people do refrain from talking about it at all. But I think the reality is people don't talk about it because people are not educated enough about it. And there's sometimes a different way of going about it. So instead of just saying to people, you know, asking them questions directly, you might want to start with, you know, is this something which you would mind talking about? If not, it's completely okay. And then second, it's about being educated. I mean, I've been doing a number of talks in relation to sort of terminology, sort of explaining what can be said at what particular time, which shouldn't be viewed as offensive, because people need to get comfortable with the terminology, and then they will become more comfortable with sort of talking about race. The second question, Poppy, was in relation to young Black men. Sorry, what was it talking about? Mental health in the workplace, was it? Or talking about...
So how can we encourage, what needs to change in the workplace culture to encourage young Black men to talk confidently about their experiences?
Sure.
So we talked about sort of white colleagues and language, but what from your perspective, obviously you can't speak for every young Black man out there, but from your perspective, what needs to change?
I think, firstly, because we haven't talked about race enough, and I've sort of mentioned it already, there's this absolute fear of opening up and talking about it from a young Black man's perspective. I've been in banking for over 20 years. The reality is, it's only over the last few months that I've been talking about race. Because before that, I was just concerned that it's not a topic that anyone was interested in. So I think first and foremost, what needs to change is that in terms of the culture, we need to make it absolutely clear from the top down that talking about race is not only sort of what word do I use, like expected, but there will not be any form of repercussions of doing so. And I think once that is made clear and people get comfortable with that, then they will be more willing to talk about it. And I think it's a lot easier if you're senior and you sort of have more of a voice and you're sort of well advanced in your career. You feel like you can help and you have a voice and there won't be any repercussions. But if you're 21, 22, and you've only just started your career and you start talking about racist experience, X, Y, and Z, then, there is a fear there. So I just think, quite frankly, it just needs to be made absolutely clear that there are not going to be any repercussions by talking about it. So I think that's the number one hurdle as to why people remain silent.
Thanks, Leroy. Teresa, I'm going to come back to you, and there's a question around mentors and mentoring. And I know both Leroy and Teresa, you both mentor people. What should people, young Black people, be looking for when they are seeking mentors and sponsors in the workplace? Any advice from you on that, Teresa?
Yeah, I think the most important thing is that there is a huge, huge difference between a mentor and a sponsor. Black people don't need mentoring because the mentor is the person who basically lobs you advice from the side, like the coach. The sponsor is the person who actually helps you to progress. And what I always say is that it's so important that you need both, but you need to understand that Black people need sponsors, they don't need mentors. I always talk about relationships, and for me, and it comes back to creating authentic relationships with people, because those people who sponsored me, I wasn't mentored into the partnership at PwC. I was sponsored into the partnership at PwC. So those people who sponsored me were people that I primarily got to work with on a great client or a great project. And we kind of had that bonding, experience. And I showed them I could do a great job and all of that. But also through that, I shared some of myself and, vice versa. So when I think of like the 4 or 5 people who sponsored me in the partnership, all of whom are retired now, they are still my friends, even though they're long retired, and they will still check in on me. And, I'm sure if they see this on LinkedIn, I will get messages from each of them. So it's that creating, and I think a lot of our Black people don't understand that it's about the creating relationships that lead to sponsorships that's the important thing for career progression.
Thank you. And I'm just really conscious of time. There's a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to ask for one last sort of reflection from all three of you before we end. Nigel Jones, you make a great point on the chat, and I would just like to say those words out loud, not for discussion, or and maybe our panel members would like to respond, but you know, I need you to be 20 seconds so that we can finish on time in a moment. But Nigel, you raised the point about, you know, looking at the screen today and how many people are on here, and actually there's a shortage of white men on here. You are a white man and a friend and an ally and a board member of the City Mental Health Alliance, and you're always supporting us with particularly difficult conversations. So you're somebody that I do put up there as a role model that we all need to be looking at and learning with. So, but that is a point, isn't it? So the power within city firms, and actually not just city firms, politics, wherever you look, it sits with the majority, who are often white men, and yet we're having these very intimate conversations that tell, well, I guess nudge us to think differently, and yet the people that we probably need to hear these stories and these conversations aren't here. And I guess that's something I put to all of us to reflect on as my parting words, is where is the influence, and how do we make sure that we are voicing and we are being unrelenting in our expectations of ourselves, our communities, and our peers to do better in this space. I'm going to end our session with just a few words from our speakers. So Ashley, I'm going to come to you first. I think Ashley might have frozen. Leroy, let's go to you next.
Yeah, I mean, from my perspective, it's going to be a long journey. You know, it's going to be, you know, evolution as opposed to revolution, and we need to take sort of one step at a time. And there's only so much you can do in terms of education, and I've been doing as much as possible. And to be honest, I have been educating audiences that are also significantly white. And those people have also reached out to me for various discussions as well. And you're not going to change everybody's mind. You're not going to make everybody conscious of their biases. But if you can just do that with the work that, you know, we've all been doing in terms of making as many people aware as possible, that can only go in the right direction. You know, if there's 2 or 3 people on here which sort of go away and think differently, then, you know, good.
Thanks, Leroy, and thank you so much for your time today. Teresa?
Just to reflect on the point I made about Black women and what's really kind of going on underneath. It's the same for Black men, but as a woman, I sort of speak for my gender. And so, if you are a Black woman on this call, and I see a few of you, I guess I see you. If you're not a Black woman and you've heard me, I guess I would ask you to go back and see your Black colleagues.
Thank you. Powerful. Ashley?
I feel like I don't really have as much to say, because I feel like I've only been in the workplace such a short period of time. So yeah, I'm kind of stumped by this. I think this is something that maybe I will figure out as I go along more in the world of work, to be honest.
Well, thank you, Ashley. And I think that's a good commitment to be making to yourself. Let's work this out as we're going along, because actually that's all of us are doing. So thank you very much. Thank you all. I'm a few minutes over time, but thank you all for staying, for listening. If you've got any other ideas on some of what you've heard, if we can help Ashley develop her ambitions, if we can mentor Black men and women, and if we can keep, to Leroy's point, telling the stories and noticing and seeing each other, we'll have created miracles. Thank you so much. Have a fantastic evening.
Thank you, Poppy.
Thank you.
Thank you.